I mean, I'll give it to you. Let's measure this hemlock. I think that's all we'll need.
If you maybe just repeat for us, okay, this is an hemlock that we planted maybe 2 years ago, or?
Nope, native, natural.
Oh, natural, okay, sorry.
So this is a naturally occurring hemlock. In fact, our western hemlock isn't super common in the local forest above us because it's so dry. It doesn't like to be terribly dry, but because the reservoir was so wet, this was actually the most common conifer species in Mills, and I believe it still might be. Certainly the most common naturally occurring hemlock, and it's perfect because we had these pioneering species come in. They came in at really dense numbers. It's all red alder, cottonwood, and willow, very natural-like forest, but more common in the riparian and floodplain areas of the Elwha. And so for something like the hemlock, that's a nice, it's almost like a nursery for it. It doesn't like to be in the full sun, so this will outlive these guys and eventually take over in the canopy and become the future forest.
I need this last sentence again.
The last
Can you
sentence?
repeat this sentence again?
I don't know, what did I say?
This might...
Yeah. So this is the current forest that'll be here for a good 100 years, and that's the future forest. This plant will tolerate the shade and outlive these guys and become, and eventually grow up into the canopy.
And how do you explain that this kind of totally natural forest could be so different from the other above us, you know?
Yeah. So, this project really, I like to say, is the tale of two surfaces. We have what we looked at down there, which were coarse materials, sand, gravel, and cobble that came down during dam removal from the delta. That's a tough surface. There's no moisture. There's no organic matter. Plants are going to take a really long time to grow, if they grow at all. This surface we're in now is the fine sediments. So this is the other surface and the other half of the story. The fine sediments were excellent surface for plants. All of these trees came in here on their own, and they thrived right off the bat.
How did they come from here on?
So all of these species came in through the wind. So, and then some of the species, actually all of these species could have also come in by the lake, actually dumping them on the shoreline. And we do have a few bands of, especially cottonwood and willow, where that happened in real high densities about halfway down this slope. But most of it came in the wind, and they came in during the drawdown. So the drawdown of the reservoir was slow, so that was excellent for two reasons. One, it provided lots of time for all the different species to put out their seed. So it wasn't just a one window of time, right? It was through a long period of time. And it was a nice saturated, full sun surface. Lots of sun, lots of moisture. So a seed hits that surface, it's got a lot of moisture for it to get established, to germinate and to establish. We didn't have to water, right? Because they had been a lake for so long, these silts and clays hold on to moisture for a long time, and the plants were really able to get pretty big in just a year or so, and they've continued to show excellent growth, despite the fact that it's not a particularly nutrient-rich surface. It just has more moisture, and that's the big difference.
And it is not surprising that no, it's not surprising, but my question is naive to have an interesting answer. The part which he's thriving the most in a most impressive way is the natural part. No?
Yeah, so the story on these fine sediments is obviously the natural regeneration, so what nature did. We also planted in the beginning, because in the first year we focused on areas far from seed sources that were on fine sediments. And we tracked those plants, and they also did well. So all of the plantings did well, all of the natural regeneration did well. The only difference in planted sites is we tend to have more species. So there's a more larger diversity of species, which in the long run could matter for how resilient that forest is, but it might not. We don't really know. It wasn't necessary to plant in those areas. We didn't know that at the time, and as soon as we recognized the natural regeneration that it came in, we backed off and focused all our resources on the coarse sediments, where clearly nature was not, at least not rapidly, bringing in native vegetation.
T'as besoin de refaire ton diaph ou pas?
No, sorry.
Could, maybe a last question about the shade.
Mhm.
Could we expect that maybe the next step in the riverbanks could be that maybe such a kind of forest could grow in the future and provide some shade for the salmon, etc.?
Yeah.
Could it be possible?
So really to benefit salmon, there's a couple things going on. First off, these fine sediments could potentially be a problem for fish. And so the fact that these surfaces are now heavily forested is great for the fish. That was one of our first goals. Keep the fine sediments here and don't let them constantly bleed into the river. The second thing that we want to see happen for the fish is down on the floodplain itself. We want to see the river we want to see the floodplain develop forested islands so that some channels that are slower moving have some shade and a little bit of protection for salmon. We expect that to start to happen now that the river has finally settled down and become a little more natural in its movements. Most of these species, we're in a wilderness. They're here. They can get there on their own. There's plenty of moisture, and so we expect that process to begin. And it could happen rapidly. The forest we're standing in now is very typical to a riparian forest. And as you can see, they're pretty tall. They're only 6 years old. And so something like this could form very quickly once those landforms down on the floodplain stabilize. And we didn't do it.
You can measure again. Thank you, David.
Alrighty. Sugaheterophylla, naturally occurring. It's a thrifty specimen. It's about 58 inches tall. Has an average canopy of about 37 inches.
Pretty good.
Pretty good. Multiple branched, good color, vigorous. Stem diameter, pretty typical actually for this size sapling. About half an inch, a little more than half inch, 5/8. So, has some browse damage, but it has a new leader, so it's doing well.
Is that true for the bird spaces? Because it's very interesting for us to.
Can you show it to me?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the browse.
Yeah,
Use your
yeah.
hand.
Yes, please, David.
Continuity, Dave.
Oh, kind of. So browse damage. This guy got nicked. Probably a deer at this elevation. So, but you see, it has a new leader forming. So once those auxins are removed, then it allows the shoot to come up.
Is it a good? This type of forest is also for wildlife.
Oh,
It's-
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
part
excellent.
Of,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
maybe David, you can talk to me about that here.
Oh, what? I'm not a wildlife biologist.
No, okay.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that we could say about
Yeah.
one thing we can say about planted sites, there's more. So one of the things we did try to do on the valley wall, well, in all our plantings, was introduce species that we knew would take a long time to get out here, but had we're going to have a bigger impact on wildlife. So like bitter cherry, crabapple, nooka rose, so species that create little fruits, that develop fruits. with the idea